In the glimmering world of Golden Age Hollywood, beauty had a narrow definition: slim, glamorous, and picture-perfect. But not every starlet conformed to the era's unforgiving body standards. These 27 actresses were powerful, beloved, and labeled fat by Hollywood's cruel lens. What they endured reveals the darker truth behind the silver screen's glitter. These women didn't just defy norms, they carried the weight of an entire industry's prejudice. 1. Marie Drestler. Marie Drestler was never meant to be a star, at least not by Hollywood's size-obsessed standards. At over 200 pounds, she didn't fit the mold of a leading lady. Yet, in the early 1930s, she became the box office queen. Known for her gravelly voice, comedic brilliance, and no-nonsense attitude, Drestler proved that talent could outweigh waistlines. Her role in Min and Bill won her the Best Actress Oscar in 1931, and she went on to star in hits like Dinner at 8. Still, she was often portrayed as the joke, a funny, frumpy woman audiences could laugh at. Studio heads doubted she could carry serious roles, pigeonholing her into motherly or comic relief characters. The irony? She earned more in ticket sales than many of the era's beauty queens. Sadly, cancer cut her life short in 1934, but not before she left a legacy that made it clear: charisma and command didn't need to be thin. Marie Dressler's career is proof that Hollywood's obsession with thinness couldn't always silence real talent. She wasn't just the fat woman who made people laugh. She was a legend who shattered the beauty myth with every scene. 2. Kate Smith Long, before body positivity was even a whisper, Kate Smith stood unapologetically in front of a microphone and a camera. With her powerful soprano voice and imposing frame, she earned the nickname the Songbird of the South. During the 1930s and 40s, she was one of America's most recognizable stars. Her rendition of God Bless America became an anthem of national pride, especially during wartime. But despite her unmatched vocal talent, Kate's size was a running theme in press coverage. Jokes about her weight weren't just common, they were expected. In Hollywood circles, she was often boxed in as the fat lady who sings, used more as a novelty than a nuanced performer. Even as she headlined radio programs and made appearances in film and television, the focus remained on her body rather than her gift. Studio executives and promoters never quite knew what to do with her. Slimming down for roles wasn't an option. She was who she was. In an industry obsessed with image, Smith made it by sheer force of presence. Her confidence, patriotism, and vocal power made her a cultural force, and a quiet rebel against Hollywood's narrow beauty ideals. 3. Hattie McDaniel. Hattie McDaniel broke barriers and bore the weight of typecasting. As the first black actor to win an Academy Award for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, she made history. But her triumph was bittersweet. Her size, along with her race, confined her to a very specific, and often degrading, Hollywood box. McDaniel's heavy-set appearance made her the go-to choice for maid and servant roles. She played over 70 of them. The stereotype of the big, jolly mammy wasn't just limiting, it was dehumanizing. And while McDaniel was often praised for her warmth and presence, she was also a target of ridicule. Comedians mimicked her voice. Columnists made jokes about her weight. Even black civil rights leaders criticized her for reinforcing harmful imagery. Yet behind the Hollywood curtain, Hattie was elegant, sharp, and politically active. She used her influence to advocate for better roles for black actors. Sadly, she never escaped the shadow of that Oscar-winning role, or the body shaming that came with it. Hattie McDaniel remains a complex symbol, a woman whose size and talent both made her visible, and trapped her in Hollywood's cruelest cage. 4. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters never pretended to be a pin-up girl. She was smart, bold, and deeply talented. But she didn't always fit into the skim-fit dresses of her co-stars. Early in her career, she worked hard to maintain a trim figure. But by the 1960s, she had gained weight and was no longer seen as leading lady material. Yet Winters refused to disappear. Instead, she embraced character roles, portraying troubled mothers, embittered wives, and vulnerable women on the edge. Her performances in A Patch of Blue, The Diary of Anne Frank, and The Poseidon Adventure earned her acclaim and 2 Academy Awards. Still, gossip columns tore into her. Public jokes about her weight loss attempts and yo-yo dieting became tabloid fodder. She fought back the only way she knew how, by outacting everyone in the room. Shelley Winters didn't let weight define her worth. She weaponized her emotions and defied the studio system, proving that a fat actress could still command the screen and win the industry's highest honors. 5. Kay Francis. In the 1930s, Kay Francis was the queen of Warner Brothers. With her deep voice, signature widow's peak, and tall, statuesque frame, she oozed sophistication. But as she aged, Hollywood's cruel gaze turned from admiration to rejection, especially as she began gaining weight in the 1940s. Studios that once scrambled to feature her in lush melodramas now found her too big for the screen. Roles dried up. Costume designers struggled to flatter her fuller figure, and directors quietly moved on to younger, thinner talent. The glamorous gowns she once wore with pride were replaced with frumpy housecoats or off-screen obscurity. By the late 1940s, Kay Francis had virtually disappeared from film. Yet she remained a symbol of an era, elegant, poised, and deeply affected by the industry's obsession with youth and thinness. She reportedly turned to alcohol and reclusiveness in her later years, heartbroken by how quickly she'd been cast aside. Kay Francis wasn't just a casualty of aging. She was a reminder that even the most luminous stars could be dimmed by an unforgiving lens that punished not only time, but weight. 6. Marjorie Maine. Marjorie Maine wasn't the kind of woman Hollywood typically put in a dress. Gruff-voiced, broad-shouldered, and blunt to the bone, she carved a niche for herself by playing earthy, hard-edged rural women, usually heavy-set, always loud. In her most iconic role as Ma Kettle in the Ma and Pa Kettle series, her large frame became part of the comedy. She wasn't just big in stature, she had presence. But that didn't mean the industry treated her kindly. Critics rarely discussed her acting without referencing her unladylike body. Directors pigeonholed her into exaggerated, often ridiculous roles. She was the punchline, not the star. Yet her performances had depth. Beneath the bark was a woman who could command a scene with subtlety and heart. Maine's physicality made her a go-to for no-nonsense farm wives or spinster aunts, but it also made her uncastable in anything resembling romantic or serious drama. Her talent was undeniable, but the doors were narrow, and she didn't fit through. She made peace with that. "I'm not a beauty, but I make people laugh," she once said. And laugh they did, at her, but more often with her. Marjorie Maine turned her size into her strength, but she paid the price for it. 7. Judy Kenova. Judy Kenova was never meant to be glamorous. Her claim to fame came from playing the hayseed girl with a loud laugh, buck teeth, and country charm. But underneath the slapstick image was a savvy performer who knew exactly how to work a crowd. She was heavier than most leading ladies, and Hollywood leaned into it. turning her figure into fodder for gags and ridicule. Her weight wasn't just a background detail, it was the joke. From radio shows to movies, Kenova was typecast as the chubby yokel, a woman who didn't know how to dress or behave properly. The implication was clear. Heavy women were funny, not desirable. Despite that, she built a long and lucrative career. She also had pipes. Judy was a trained opera singer, but rarely got to showcase it seriously on screen. Her comedic persona was too profitable to change. Hollywood didn't give Judy Kenova space to grow beyond the caricature. And though she played the fool, she was anything but. She embraced her size with confidence, often parodying the very stereotypes forced upon her. She may have been cast as a joke, but she held the power, making audiences laugh on her terms. 8. Sophie Tucker. Sophie Tucker didn't just break the mold, she threw it out the window and danced on the shards. Known as the last of the red-hot mamas, Tucker was a bold, brassy, plus-sized singer and actress who celebrated her size instead of hiding it. In the early 20th century, when women were expected to be demure and dainty, Tucker flaunted her curves, deep voice, and risque humor. She wasn't just thick-skinned, she was bulletproof. Her songs were full of double entendres and self-aware wit. One of her signatures? Poking fun at her own weight before anyone else could. She reclaimed the power of the joke. Though she appeared in a few films, Hollywood never quite knew what to do with her. She didn't fit their beauty ideal. Studios thought she was too big, too loud, too real. But Sophie Tucker didn't need the movies. She conquered the stage and radio on her own terms, commanding packed houses from coast to coast. In an industry that tried to shrink women, Tucker expanded. She didn't apologize. She didn't conform. She used her size as her identity and her weapon, and proved that charisma, humor, and raw talent could outweigh the cruelest standards. 9. Margaret Dumont. To most audiences, Margaret Dumont was the rich, regal foil to the Marx Brothers' chaos, a straight-laced woman with pearls, poise, and a puzzled expression. But behind that persona was an actress often cast because of her stature. Dumont was tall, big-boned, and full-figured, qualities that made her the ideal target in slapstick comedy. She wasn't fat by modern standards, but Hollywood in the 1930s saw her as such. Her body was used to create contrast. Next to the wiry Groucho Marx or the zany Harpo, Dumont looked like a looming matron. Her roles almost always revolved around this dynamic. She was the joke setup, rarely the punchline deliverer. Despite being central to so many classic comedies, she was never truly recognized for her timing, poise, or intelligence. Some even claimed she didn't get the jokes she was in, a myth that diminished her craft. In reality, Margaret Dumont was a master at what she did, a comic anchor in the storm. She used her physical presence as a tool of comedy, standing tall while chaos spun around her. Her size wasn't a flaw. It was the foundation for one of the most iconic comedic pairings in film history. 10. Elsa Lchester. Elsa Lchester may be remembered as the Bride of Frankenstein, but her career and body refused to stay in one box. With her eccentric charm and expressive features, she captivated audiences, especially in character roles. But as she aged and gained weight, Hollywood relegated her to the sidelines. In her younger years, she was slim and striking. But after marrying actor Charles Laughton and settling into more mature roles, her weight became a source of gossip. Costume designers grumbled, directors offered her smaller parts, and columnists made subtle jabs about her quirky appearance, code for the fact that she no longer looked like a leading lady. Still, Elsa leaned into her oddball energy. She played mysterious aunts, sinister matrons, and dotty widows with flair. Her size, though whispered about in the background, became part of her identity on screen. She brought warmth, weirdness, and a rare authenticity. Elsa Lchester didn't let extra pounds silence her presence. She may have been pushed to the fringes, but she never stopped stealing scenes. In a world obsessed with youth and thinness, she made eccentricity and imperfection something to admire. 11. Joan Davis. Joan Davis was comedy gold wrapped in a body that never quite fit Hollywood's ideal. With her expressive face, rubbery limbs, and impeccable timing, she was a sensation on radio, TV, and in film. But her fuller figure always made her the sidekick, not the star. In a world dominated by hourglass silhouettes and glamour shots, Davis was branded the funny fat girl. Hollywood loved to laugh at her, often casting her in roles where her size became the central joke. She was the clumsy secretary, the desperate bachelorette, the over-the-top housewife. Never the love interest, rarely the heroine. Still, Joan played these parts with such infectious energy that audiences adored her. She lit up screens in Hold That Ghost, and later broke records with her sitcom, I Married Joan. Off-screen, Joan longed to be seen as more than a punchline. Her weight was both her passport and her prison. She once admitted that no matter how funny she was, she knew she'd never get a serious role because of how she looked. Joan Davis didn't just battle body image stereotypes, she built a career in spite of them. And in doing so, she made room for future funny women who didn't fit the mold either. 12th, Zasu Pitts. Zasu Pitts had a face like a question mark and a voice like a nervous violin. With her unique look and fluttery persona, she became one of Hollywood's most recognizable character actresses. But Zasu didn't come packaged in the slim, glamorous style studios preferred. She had soft features, a fuller frame, and an awkwardness that became her trademark. While not morbidly obese, Pitts was consistently referred to as plump or pudgy in press write-ups. Casting directors saw her as the anxious friend, the nosy neighbor, the unfortunate maiden aunt. In silent films, she started off in dramatic roles. But once talkies revealed her quirky voice and oddball timing, she was almost exclusively relegated to comedy. Still, Zasu turned her body type into an asset. She wasn't fighting to be a bombshell. She was building a new category, and audiences loved her for it. Yet the industry never let her escape that box. She was typecast, limited, and overlooked for more dynamic parts because of her appearance. Zasu Pitts may have looked out of place in old Hollywood, but she found her own way in and left a mark with humor, humility, and heart. 13. Martha Raye. Martha Raye had a mouth so big it became her nickname, the Big Mouth. But behind the comic exaggeration was a woman with an even bigger voice, spirit, and body. With her bold delivery and no-holds-barred humor, she was a natural fit for radio and film comedies. But her broad features and curvy figure meant Hollywood never treated her as a leading lady. She was often cast as the wacky sidekick, the loud best friend, the overbearing sister. And more often than not, her size became part of the gag. Whether falling through furniture or out eating her co-stars, Martha's physicality was constantly used for laughs. Despite this, she had incredible range. Off-screen, she was a devoted humanitarian, touring with the USO and earning a Presidential Medal of Freedom. On stage, she could belt out a song with Broadway strength and had the timing of a master comic. Still, casting directors couldn't see past her size. They didn't want depth or elegance. They wanted a caricature. Martha Raye gave them that, but she also gave audiences someone real, brash, funny, and unapologetically big-hearted. 14. Thelma Ritter. Thelma Ritter was never a glamour girl, and she knew it. With her Brooklyn accent, hunched posture, and practical wardrobe, she was Hollywood's go-to for wisecracking maids, cynical mothers, and no-nonsense neighbors. But what many forget is that her full figure contributed heavily to how she was cast. Ritter was short, sturdy, and far from the willowy image studios craved. That made her perfect for working-class roles, but nearly invisible in anything romantic or aspirational. She brought humanity to every part, even when Hollywood refused to give her leading lady treatment. In All About Eve, Pillow Talk, and Rear Window, she stole scenes without ever being dressed to impress. Thelma Ritter earned 6 Oscar nominations, yet never won. Critics loved her, audiences adored her, but studios never saw her as a star. Why? In part because she didn't look like one. She didn't beg for the spotlight. She earned it. And in doing so, she showed that realness, wrinkles, weight, and all could be just as magnetic as glamour. Maybe more. 15. Charlotte Greenwood. Charlotte Greenwood was a comic whirlwind with long legs, boundless energy, and a physical presence that made her impossible to ignore. She wasn't conventionally attractive, and she certainly wasn't thin by Hollywood standards. Towering over most of her co-stars, she was both tall and broad, with a build that landed her almost exclusively in comic roles. But Greenwood embraced her uniqueness. She could high kick like no one else and used her body like an instrument of comedy. Her signature move, flinging her legs straight up, became her calling card. In films like Down Argentine Way and Oklahoma, she brought athleticism, silliness, and spark to every frame. Still, she was rarely seen as feminine. Critics often described her as gangly or manly, and her size was a constant topic of conversation. She wasn't fat in the traditional sense, but her broad figure and unusual looks kept her out of the romantic spotlight. Charlotte Greenwood turned physicality into performance art. Hollywood might have underestimated her, but she danced rings around the stereotype and left audiences breathless, laughing all the way. 16. Edna May Oliver. Edna May Oliver was never destined for romantic leads, and she knew it. With her tall, angular frame and distinct hawkish features, she was often typecast as the spinster, the schoolmarm, or the sharp-tongued aunt. But what critics often failed to acknowledge was that she was also considerably heavier than the era's ideal, which only intensified her casting into unlovable roles. Oliver wasn't just heavy, she was smart. In film after film, she played intelligent, bossy women who outwitted the men around them. But the press didn't write about her wit or acting chops. They wrote about her size. Her larger presence was something the camera didn't ignore, and Hollywood didn't know how to respect. Yet Edna didn't back down. She leaned into it, turning what others saw as flaws into a formidable screen persona. In Little Women, David Copperfield, and The Penguin Pool Murder, she elevated every scene she was in. Oliver's weight, combined with her commanding presence, became part of her legend. She wasn't a bombshell, but she was unforgettable. And in a world that punished women for being different, Edna May Oliver stood tall, wide, and proudly outside the mold. 17. Betty Hutton. Betty Hutton was a whirlwind, singing, dancing, and laughing her way through the 1940s as one of Paramount's brightest stars. But fame was fickle, and so was her weight. In her prime, she fit the energetic girl-next-door mold. But as the years passed, her struggles with mental health, financial instability, and emotional turmoil led to significant weight gain and brutal public backlash. Hutton's later appearances were often met with cruel commentary. Columnists referred to her as bloated or unrecognizable. The very industry that once cheered her exuberance now shamed her for no longer fitting into a size 2 dress. Yet through it all, Betty remained a fighter. She battled depression, found solace in religion, and even worked as a cook in a Catholic rectory when she had no other means. The woman who once starred in Annie Get Your Gun was now mocked for being too fat to perform. Her weight gain didn't diminish her talent. It only revealed Hollywood's cold heart. Betty Hutton's story is one of rise, fall, and resilience. She may have gained pounds, but she never lost the spark that made her a star. 18. Anne Sheridan. Anne Sheridan was once dubbed the Oomph Girl, a title that followed her like a shadow. With her smoldering looks and full figure, she exuded sex appeal during the late 1930s and 1940s. But as she aged and her body naturally changed, Hollywood turned on her. The curves that once made her famous became the curves that cost her roles. By the early 1950s, critics weren't discussing her acting anymore. They were discussing her weight. Tabloids speculated about her size. Studio heads passed her over for parts. Despite her enormous popularity and strong performances in films like King's Row and The Man Who Came to Dinner, she found herself increasingly boxed out. It was a cruel irony. The very thing that made Anne a sensation was the very thing that led to her downfall. Hollywood loved voluptuous women, until it didn't. Anne Sheridan didn't let it destroy her. She pivoted to television and continued working until her untimely death in 1967. She died at 51, too young, too talented, and far too dismissed by a system that judged her more by inches than by impact. 19th. Mabel Normand. Mabel Normand was one of the brightest stars of silent cinema. A muse to Charlie Chaplin and a queen of Keystone comedies, she was beautiful, spirited, and wildly popular. But as her health declined and scandals consumed her career, so did her weight increase, and with it came a tidal wave of judgment. By the early 1920s, Normand was gaining weight rapidly due to illness and substance abuse. Studio executives turned cold. Once the darling of Mack Sennett's studio, she was now whispered about as washed up and too fat for film. She became a cautionary tale about fame, femininity, and flesh. Still, Mabel tried to reclaim her place. She starred in The Extra Girl and Raggedy Rose, bringing her unique charm to every frame. But the audience didn't forget the scandals, and neither did Hollywood. Her size became a symbol of her decline, not her talent. Mabel Normand died at just 37 from tuberculosis. She left behind a complicated legacy, a pioneer of early film who was fat-shamed and blacklisted in equal measure. But those who truly remember Mabel don't see the weight. They see the wit, the beauty, and the star who once made the world laugh. 20th. Shirley Booth. Shirley Booth is best remembered for her Oscar-winning role in Come Back, Little Sheba, a performance so raw and vulnerable it stunned Hollywood. She was in her 50s when she won that award, and by then she had already been labeled too plain and too heavy for the big screen. But Shirley didn't come to act for glamour. She came for truth. Booth was undeniably overweight by Tinseltown's narrow lens, and that made her a rarity. She wasn't cast for beauty. She was cast for depth. She brought realism to every line, every sigh, every glance. But that didn't stop the industry from pushing her aside. She was considered too matronly for leading roles and found herself limited to playing downtrodden housewives and spinsters. Despite this, she made a remarkable impact, winning the Triple Crown of acting. Her weight may have limited her opportunities, but not her legacy. In a world that worshipped youth and slim waists, Shirley Booth dared to be authentic. She didn't play a star, she played a woman. And in doing so, she became one of the most respected actresses of her time. 21st. Virginia O'Brien. Virginia O'Brien was nicknamed Miss Deadpan for her signature wide-eyed, emotionless singing style. But what made her truly stand out was her unconventional presence. She didn't fit the mold of the sultry 1940s starlet. Tall, broad-shouldered, and fuller-figured than her MGM contemporaries, she was often placed on the edges of glamour. Her unique comedic delivery made her a staple of MGM musicals like Ship Ahoy and Ziegfeld Follies, where she would sing a number completely stone-faced before breaking into a sly smile. But as her weight fluctuated and younger, slimmer stars flooded the market. Her screen time diminished. The studio system had little patience for actresses who didn't stay trim. Behind the scenes, O'Brien struggled to keep her career alive. Her talent was undeniable. She could sing, dance, and deliver punchlines with razor precision, but producers increasingly viewed her as a novelty. She faded from film by the late 1940s, making only occasional stage or TV appearances. Virginia O'Brien never complained publicly. She knew the game. She played it well, and with class. But the cruel truth remains. Her size, though never the punchline, was part of what pushed her to the margins in an industry that couldn't see past the waistline. 22nd. Jane Darwell. Jane Darwell gave one of the most iconic performances of the 20th century, as Ma Joad in The Grapes of Wrath. That role earned her an Academy Award, but it also cemented a stereotype she could never break: the large, nurturing, suffering mother. From her earliest days in silent film, Darwell was cast as someone's matron. She was heavyset and middle-aged even in her 30s, and Hollywood rarely allowed her to be anything else. Her characters were salt-of-the-earth women, but that salt came with a side of sadness. She was the mother who lost everything, the widow who had seen too much, the plump housekeeper who knew all the secrets. Though beloved by audiences, Jane Darwell was never romanticized. She wasn't glamorized, she wasn't even given a backstory in most films. Her weight made her a placeholder, the strong but frumpy supporting role that served to elevate the drama around her. Still, she made that role unforgettable. With a trembling voice and compassionate eyes, Darwell proved that emotional weight mattered more than physical. And for a brief, brilliant moment, Oscar in hand, Hollywood saw her not just as a big woman, but as a great one. 23rd. Gertrude Berg. Gertrude Berg was a pioneer, a trailblazer, a household name in radio and television. And she did it all in a body that didn't match the dainty, idealized image of femininity pushed by Hollywood. Stocky, short, and round-faced, Berg was the creator and star of The Goldbergs, a long-running show that portrayed Jewish family life in America with honesty and humor. But her physical appearance made her a target for critics who could never quite divorce size from quality. She was warm, commanding, and maternal on-screen, but off-screen she was described as homely and plump, coded language used to diminish her brilliance. She wrote scripts, produced episodes, created characters with dimension and soul. Yet the entertainment press often overlooked her talent in favor of discussing her appearance. In a thinner woman, her accomplishments might have been lionized. For Berg, they were treated as an exception. Despite the marginalization, Gertrude won an Emmy and a Tony and helped shape the early landscape of American TV. She was big, in talent, in stature, in impact, and she did it without ever needing to fit the mold. 24. Ethel Merman. Ethel Merman had a voice that could blow the doors off a theater, and a presence to match. Broadway's First Lady wasn't petite or coy. She was brash, brassy, and built like a freight train. Her physical presence, like her voice, was impossible to ignore. That made her perfect for the stage, and difficult for the silver screen. In film adaptations like Call Me Madam and Anything Goes, Merman often found herself diluted. Camera angles hid her bulk. Wardrobes tried to slim her down. Directors sought ways to soften her power. But Ethel wasn't meant to be soft. She was made for impact. Off-screen, critics were rarely kind. Her heavy-set frame and angular features made her the subject of frequent jabs. Columnists asked why she hadn't trimmed down like other stars. But Merman refused to apologize. Her energy didn't come from dieting, it came from owning the room. Hollywood tried to contain her. Broadway celebrated her. And in the end, it was her size, physical and vocal, that made her one of the most unforgettable performers of the century. 25th. Butterfly McQueen. Butterfly McQueen is best remembered as the high-pitched, frantic maid Prissy in Gone with the Wind. Though she was small in frame during that film, her later years brought dramatic weight gain, and with it, a shift in how the industry viewed her. In the 1940s, McQueen struggled to escape typecasting as the nervous, comic relief maid. Her size was often ridiculed, even when she was thin. But in her later years, as she gained weight, the tone of that ridicule became even sharper. Offers dried up. Respect waned. Hollywood had little use for an older, heavier black woman, especially one who spoke her mind. Butterfly, however, didn't disappear. She turned to theater, then later became a beloved figure in her community. She studied religion and philosophy. She lived modestly. But the sting of Hollywood's abandonment never fully healed. Her later interviews reflect both pride and pain. She knew her worth, but Hollywood didn't. Not when she was skinny, and especially not when she gained weight. Butterfly McQueen may have been laughed at in her youth, but in the end, she soared. On her own terms. 26. Louise Fazenda. Louise Fazenda was a staple of silent comedy, a vaudeville-trained actress with a gift for making people laugh through expressive face work, wild gestures, and physicality. She wasn't traditionally beautiful, and she wasn't thin either. With her wide-set features and ample frame, Fazenda was routinely cast as the awkward spinster or the bumbling servant. Her weight was often played for laughs. In films like The Bat and countless silent shorts with Mack Sennett, she was the klutzy housemaid or the country bumpkin who always seemed to trip, fall, or crash through scenery. Directors leaned into her physicality, choreographing scenes around her size. But despite the slapstick framing, Fazenda had sharp timing and deep understanding of comedic rhythm. She never complained publicly about typecasting, but it was clear that her physical appearance locked her into a narrow lane. Even after marrying studio mogul Hal B. Wallace, she stayed mostly behind the scenes. The roles had stopped coming, not because her talent faded, but because she no longer fit the image of what Hollywood wanted on screen. Louise Fazenda made people laugh, but Hollywood never let her move beyond the laugh track. Still, her work helped shape the foundations of American comedy, and her size, while mocked, was also part of her magnetic charm. 27. Mae West. Mae West may be the most iconic curvy woman in Hollywood history, but even she wasn't safe from ridicule when age added pounds to her already voluptuous figure. In her youth, Mae owned the screen with her sultry voice, razor wit, and unapologetic curves. She turned sensuality into power, and didn't let a single studio exec tell her to tone it down. But as the decades passed and her body thickened, the tone around her changed. She was no longer alluring, just aging and fat. In her 60s and 70s, she still played flirtatious roles, refusing to surrender to ageism or body shaming. But critics were ruthless. Her return to the screen in Myra Breckinridge and Sextet was mocked, not because of her acting, but because of her body. May never flinched. She simply wrote her own scripts, produced her own films, and surrounded herself with people who adored her. She built a mythology on confidence, not conformity. Mae West didn't just resist Hollywood's body image rules. She rewrote them. In a world that demanded women shrink, she made herself larger than life. Even at her heaviest, she was a goddess in her own eyes, and dared the world to disagree. In Golden Age, Hollywood, being fat wasn't just a physical trait, it was a barrier, a punchline, a prison. But these 27 actresses turned it into power, presence, and performance. They challenged the beauty myths of their time and proved one thing: you didn't need to be thin to be unforgettable.